Welcome everyone. I know we have some folks coming into the session, but welcome. Good afternoon. I see some folks coming on in the room. Well, I want to start us off by introducing myself. I am Ashley Brazel, and I'm the Associate Director of New Student and Family Programs. I'm sitting in for Jonathan today, and I want to welcome you all to our session for another Family Youth Chat. And so it's a really exciting day. We have another special guest with us, and we're going to talk about education abroad. And so I do want to introduce you to our speaker, Emily, who is our Assistant Director of Global Education here at UMass Amherst. And she has extensive experience helping students and families navigate international programs. And she's going to give us a little presentation and give us some insights. I do want to note that the webinar chat is not going to be on during the presentation. We will be taking questions, however, after the presentation through Q&A. So again, we aren't doing chat during the presentation, but afterwards we will open up the Q&A. So any questions you have, Emily can try and answer those. So I will pass it over to Emily. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And yeah, you can take it away.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us and taking time out of your day to learn a little bit more about how study abroad works at UMass and how you can support your students. So as Ashley mentioned, I have prepared some slides for us this afternoon. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing that so you can see a little bit more of what we'll be covering. All right. So bear with me for one moment as I get into presentation mode. All right. Ashley, will you let me know if you're all able to see the Family Youth Chat slide?
We can see it. It's wonderful.
Perfect. Just want to make sure everybody can see what I'm seeing. Great. So this is Education Abroad, and I do want to mention we've actually just recently gone through a rebranding. So we were formerly called the International Programs Office and the Office of Education Abroad, and we are now the Office of Global Affairs, and Study Abroad or Education Abroad is now the Office of Global Education. So I just wanted to make that clear for you all today. So here's a little bit of where we're going to be going throughout this presentation. I'm intentionally keeping it to a higher level overview and leaving a lot of time for audience questions. So these are the areas that I think can be particularly helpful for families to identify to support their students. So we're going to talk about supporting your students' interest in going abroad, their decision-making process with how that's going to look for them, going through the application process, how to pay for study abroad, their health and well-being, including what it's like when they're abroad a little bit more. And then finally, a large chunk of the time for questions. An interesting parallel is that studying abroad can be a lot like choosing where to go to college and settling into college. So we often tell students that this is very much a mini version of that. So I think it's always helpful to share that information with parents and families because those are some things that you've already experienced together and you've already done a lot of the decision making and planning. And so knowing that this is a smaller version of that can really help you thinking about how to be prepared, how to make decisions, what kinds of questions to ask, and so on and so forth to get that information. So I am Emily Austinson. I'm the Assistant Director of Global Education in the Office of Global Affairs, and I am part of a really big office here on campus. So I'm part of a staff of about 15 people from an executive director. I'm the assistant director. I have several education abroad advising colleagues. We have some support staff colleagues, and we also have an amazing team of peer advisors. So these are returned students that now work for us as work study students, and usually we have about 12 or 15 of them per academic year that have been on all sorts of different types of programs. And so they are essential for us in helping students make decisions and get through the process of studying abroad. I also want to make mention that on our website, we specifically have a parent and family website section. I've done a screenshot here just so you can see what that homepage looks like. So we have a nice welcome from the executive director of education, global education, along with some really good spots of sort of your frequently asked areas that are important for parents and families. So health and safety, academics, and finances. And you'll notice that I'll also be spending a little bit of time on that. So if I've got a link here just so you can see what that looks like, but that would take you back to our Office of Global Affairs. We have UMass Community and then Parents and Families, which is pretty cool for that. So that's where you can find this here. All right, so back to this. So step number one, supporting your students' interest in study abroad. So number one, this is how you can encourage them to study abroad or even think about different opportunities beyond their academic experience at UMass. You can think of things like career services and internships. There's also domestic exchange. So it's always really interesting just to ask your student, what do you want to do besides taking classes and doing that sort of thing? What are the other things you want to have alongside that? And students can have a lot of support in terms of what's right for them and what they can think about for that timing. So a big key for them would be having them work with their academic advisors, especially when you're doing an academic experience like study abroad. They can help them plan when is a good time to go. How does that work with the progress they've already made towards their UMass degree? If there's something different or that they want to do outside of their degree, how can they build that in and still stay on track for that? And there are also financial implications to think about with that. So whenever students are doing something in place of a semester, that's always included in their UMass education, as opposed to something that's a summer or winter, which is an add-on to what they're already doing as part of their degree progress. So they can consider options for that in terms of semester versus a summer or winter program. Apply or renew your passports. So does your student have a valid passport now that they are 18 and passports are valid for up to 10 years? Do you or your other family members, do you have passports? Because a lot of families want to come and visit their students while they're abroad. So that's something you can do right away at the beginning of UMass because they're valid for such a long time. And if it's been a while since you've looked at your passport, see when it expires. Passports need to be valid at least 6 months for travel time. And so you don't want to be caught off guard that you haven't planned ahead for that. So that's something easy to do early on because it's valid for such a long time. And as students are thinking about how they want to explore their education abroad, their study abroad opportunities at UMass, we have lots of different options for them. So first of all, we always have a fall and spring education abroad fair, and we have one coming up this semester that will be on Monday, February 24th in the Student Union Ballroom. Our fall fair is usually at the end of September, and so those are always anchor dates that students can think about, checking out all of our programs, everybody in one big room in September, end of September, or at the end of February. We also have our global education website. So I showed you the parents and family section, but we have our main page here that I can click back and briefly show you as well. So this is the main page for our website, and there are lots of different places that students can go to get more information. We also have our Global Education Advising Center staffed by those peer advisors. So students can walk in at any time when classes are in session to get that advising for any part of the process, be picking that program, going through the application process and tying up loose ends before they're able to go abroad. Something else, they also may encounter study abroad through lots of different places across the university. So they could be coming to an information session about a particular program that's hosted by their college department, maybe a student organization. Sometimes they'll see us tabling around campus in different academic buildings or in different student-centered buildings. So there are lots of different ways to just ask questions, get to know us a little bit. So these are some of the common ways that students can take advantage. And then with our resources online, those are wonderful resources for you as well. So now that study abroad is something that's going to be happening, how do you support the decision-making of when and where and what that's going to look like for them? So again, paralleling back to choosing a college, there are lots of different things to consider, and everybody will have a different combination of factors that are most important for them for choosing their program. So the big three that we tend to talk about the most are academics, cost, and location. So academics, I mentioned, working with their academic advisor to plan when study abroad would be good for them along their degree path. So that's that same thing. There'll be certain majors where it's a little bit better for students to go earlier on when they're sophomores or maybe juniors. And then there'll be other majors that will have more flexibility. So they could really go as soon as their summer after their freshman year. They can go abroad more than once. They can think about semester or an academic year versus like a summer or winter program. There's different things like that. If they need to be doing major classes, if they have more flexibility and can do electives, if they're a dual major, things of that nature. So there's really lots of different combinations that students can choose when they're picking their program and how that aligns with their degree progress here at UMass. Cost is another one. Not all programs are created equal. At UMass, we don't have what's called homeschool fees, which means students that are going abroad pay the amount that their program costs. And that can vary really widely based on the type of program and what that experience can look like for students. So we do our best, particularly for semester programs, to keep that in line with in-state student costs, but programs can be less expensive or more expensive. And if you're an out-of-state student, very often you can find a slightly better value because you have a little bit more room in your budget. So if the program is less expensive, you pay that less expensive price. There are other common factors too. So as an example, students may have different identity things that they're thinking about in terms of, I present myself as this way in the world. How will that be when I go abroad, and how will I be accepted there? There could be things like accommodations that they need to be thinking about. This is what I have to be successful at UMass. Are there similar versions of things that I can have to be successful abroad? Maybe there are things like heritage. I know we get a lot of students going to different parts of the world because of some family history or tradition, or wanting to learn a little bit more about their culture or different languages too. And there can be really a lot of different things. And so this is why I say students will have different reasons and different rankings of priorities in how they pick their program. I will always say that more time for picking a program is always helpful. Oftentimes, students can be running up against deadlines and having less choices available if they want to go over a certain time frame. So the earlier, the better, just to make sure that you have options to think through different things and have lots of time on the back end to get an application passed forward. So now that they've picked their program, here's how you can support the application process for this. And again, just like applying to college, boy, this really keeps coming back and forth. So students will always have usually 2 applications for the most part, depending on their program. There will always be something through the Global Education Office. And you can see here, I've got a photo of their UMass Abroad portal. And then they will usually also have a program application, and that will be a little bit different based on where they're going. It is the age of application portals. Nobody does anything on paper anymore. So there's usually a login and normally a step-by-step checklist with all the things that they need to do, instructions on how to do them, and deadlines for all of that. All of this information will be in their portal. And as they're researching programs, they'll be able to see what programs are still open, how much time they have to apply, and things like this. Deadlines are always set so students have enough time to do this, so that's something that they understand in terms of calendars. I will say for students that are usually choosing to study abroad for a spring semester, most of the time they're seeing deadlines in September, October, maybe into November. If students are going abroad in the summer, they're probably looking at deadlines in February, maybe a little bit into March, depending on how late the program starts. If they're looking for a fall or academic year program, they're usually seeing deadlines in April, maybe May, that kind of thing. And so that's something that we're very clear with communicating to students because it is very program specific. And then of course, paperwork and all of this process is never easy, even though everybody does their best to spell out things and break things down as simply as possible. So it is very normal to ask for help, and we are more than happy to have lots of different ways for students to access us. So I already mentioned our peer advisors. So our advising center is open for walk-in advising, and that's an easy place to just sit down and have somebody walk you through that. Students will also have education abroad advisors. So that's somebody who's a specialist in programs in a particular area, and they will know the most about that particular program and a lot of those nuances. And so they are excellent for getting that firsthand information or getting connected to the people who know that if they can't help. There's also program staff. So on the opposite non-UMass side, there's always program staff that's helping administer the program and kind of the enrollment application process and pre-departure, as well as later on when students are in country, there's people to help them with any number of their needs while they're abroad. Now, here's a big thing that's always really helpful to talk about with parents and families. How do you support paying for study abroad? So just some general things to know. In your financial planning for study abroad, here are your main funding sources. Anybody who's filling out a FAFSA and has financial aid, you can absolutely use those grants, scholarships, and loans for study abroad. And then encourage your student to apply for study abroad scholarships, because more free money because of studying abroad is wonderful. So I've got a link here to a section on our website where we have a nice digest of common areas for scholarships that students can apply for. There are even things that are awarded through our office too, which means they have even better odds of getting more access to those scholarships because of less competition. If your student has a Pell Grant as part of their financial aid, there's even scholarships that they can be eligible for, like the Gilman Scholarship, which is at the federal level. So absolutely encourage them to check out their study abroad scholarships. And oftentimes, especially if they're on the early side, there's enough time for them to put together a scholarship application as well. If you use a 529 plan to pay for college, a lot of times those can be used to also pay for study abroad. If that's something that you use, talk to your financial advisor about the terms for that. Everybody works a little bit differently, and it's just always good to check in about your particular situation, but that is a very common thing for families to use when paying for study abroad. So now that you know a little bit more about what can be used for paying study abroad, a big thing is to know your program costs. So these are program-based and can be found very often on the website of whatever program your student is looking to do. And this should be fairly easy information to find. And so as you're helping your student either pick the program or they've picked the program and now you're figuring out all of the financials that go along with that, ask them to show you where those costs are posted. And if you or they can't figure it out, come talk to us, because that's absolutely very important information to know as soon as possible to get a good financial picture. And there should be good breakdowns between program fees and what's included versus what isn't included. So common things that are included are program tuition and fees, as well as insurance and things of that nature, but housing can sometimes be included and sometimes be out of pocket. Meal plans very often aren't a thing in study abroad, but sometimes they can be included. Very often students are planning for meals out of pocket. Airline tickets, always out of pocket. Books, usually less than attending UMass, but out of pocket. So it's really important to know those breakdowns. I'm sorry, I thought I'd closed out of Teams, so I wouldn't be getting notifications. So hopefully you aren't seeing those too much. Okay. And then lastly, be aware of billing timelines. So most of our applications will have some sort of a fee with the program process. So just like applying for college, you'll need to pay that in order to get the application processed. Once students are accepted, confirmation deposit to say that they're going. And then from there, based on the program, there will be different timelines for final payments for that as well. If students are using financial aid, there will be a little bit of different timelines in terms of how that financial aid is calculated and what is owed at an earlier date versus what will be owed once the financial aid is released. That's something that you can learn a little bit more about on our website, but I just want to say briefly here that if a student is using financial aid to pay for their program, the short version is the program needs to know that, and then they can calculate how much will be coming outside of that financial aid payment, and that will need to be paid earlier before the student departs versus paying with the financial aid when that's released according to a UMass calendar. And then lastly, if something were to happen and the student were to change their mind, just being aware of cancellation policies. Like a lot of things, the earlier one cancels, the less financial penalties you'll incur. And so it's really important to be aware if that's something that the student has to consider. And then my final section before questions, supporting health and well-being. So how to plan for health and safety needs. So again, just like being away from home, just like being here at UMass, what does your student need to be healthy and safe during their study abroad program? And so think about that for the time that they'll be gone. If it's for a semester, that 3 to 4 months, how would that potentially be different if they were going on a winter program, which is usually closer to 3 weeks, versus a summer program, which is maybe more like 1 to 2 months. So these can be things like making sure they know what they're doing for their medication, having checkups with their doctors here at home, and so having a good picture of their health before they're able to go abroad. And just so you're all aware, as part of our study abroad programs, all of us students will have UMass International Travel Emergency Insurance. That's something they get automatically is just going through our office, and that has really excellent coverage that students can use anywhere in the world. Got another link to more of that information back on our website. What are the program resources and how can students access them? I've been saying that programs are all a little bit different, but they all have the core of the same things. So all programs will have some sort of orientation when students arrive. Some programs might have them before students go fully abroad. But our UMass Global Education Office does have a required pre-departure orientation on Zoom. And we've done it on Zoom the last few years in the evenings so that parents and family members can join, because they found it really helpful to hear that information firsthand about all of the different things to consider with health and safety and overall wellness. All programs also have on-site support staff. And so many of our programs will have program staff that are available and on call 24/7. Some of them, particularly if you're studying at a university, so much like UMass, you have business hours. You have folks that are available for business hours versus folks that are available for emergencies. And then 24/7 emergency numbers. Any student who is abroad, we have an emergency phone that they can call at any time and get help from any of our staff on call. So that is something that's all part of the office services. What can your student do to manage their health and safety? So again, just like here, how do they take care of themselves while they're at UMass, and how are those habits and routines replicable when they're abroad? Do they follow a certain diet? Do they have to think about certain things with their sleep schedule? Is it important to be in nature? What are the things that help them take breaks when they're doing school, like social time or any hobbies that can really help with that? But another important part with that would be asking for help when they need it. So being aware of those program resources, who they can ask, how they can access those, and how they can get themselves to where they're feeling better and feeling a bit more like themselves in that place. And even with safety, how is it different from where home is? How is it different from UMass? If they're traveling to a larger city, what are some of the street smarts things that they need to be aware of? It's probably not a good idea to be leaving their things at a cafe while they're going to pick up their drink. They need to be taking valuables with them. So little adjustments like that when you're thinking about street smarts and taking care of your safety. And all of this sort of information will be communicated to them by their program staff. This is how it's different. These are some of the things you have to be aware of as an American student coming from a different university. Another important thing is how they want to stay connected to friends and family back home. We're in an age where it's really easy to stay connected internationally, and that can be wonderful. And sometimes you need to think about a balance between adjusting to a new place and staying connected to folks back home. So what would be the communication methods? How often is it good to check in? How much is too much? How do you know that everything is fine without being worried? And so that's always a really good balance to figure out with your student. And then lastly, but not least, adjustment to a new environment is normal. So a lot of those same things that you all experienced with transitioning your student to UMass, it takes time to figure out a new rhythm, to figure out new ways of doing things, and just experiencing the new on both sides. So what were the lessons that both of you learned in terms of that transition? And how can you apply some of that and maybe even accelerate that learning in a new environment? Okay. So that was sort of my general overview. Happy to go back and elaborate on any of that, but this is the section for audience questions.
Thank you so much, Emily. That presentation was incredibly informative. So the first question that came in is, if a student is going for just one semester in the fall, what are housing options on return?
Yeah, so there's actually a section on the UMass Housing website that talks about this a little bit. So if they're coming back on return, there's an option for them to reintegrate to on-campus housing, and they actually get instructions from UMass Housing on how to be able to do this.
Thank you. Let's see. Another question is, what is more popular, spring, fall, or the short semesters to study abroad?
Well, our current numbers, we have a record high of UMass students abroad this coming spring. So for now, spring semester continues to be the most popular amongst our students.
It looks like there's a couple of questions coming about Japan. So where in Japan can students travel to, and is it a Japanese school or is it a UMass school in Japan?
Yeah, good questions. So we don't really operate any study centers in general in Japan or otherwise, with the exception of our first year programs. So all of our programs in Japan, we have a combination of Japanese universities, and we actually have quite a few throughout the country, as well as programs that are run by what we call providers, so different companies that will administer programs. Most of the time, I think they also work with a local university, but those companies will act as support for liaising between the student and the local university. But they really are spread out all throughout Japan. So we have a few like in and around Tokyo, we have Hokkaido, we have some near Osaka, but we actually have a really long tradition with students studying abroad in Japan. And one of our oldest partnerships is almost 60 years, I think it is 60 years old in Japan at the University of Hokkaido.
Looks like there's a couple of questions around classes being offered in English. So in what countries do you have programs where courses are taught in English? And are all classes in English? And what level of English? So all those kind of themes around course.
Excellent questions. So students can take classes in English anywhere all over the world. We are very specific if there are places that only offer courses in the target language, but really we offer classes worldwide, and all of them will have classes taught in English. Usually students need to have a B2 level or near native level to even take those classes. So they are very high level taught by instructors for whom that is an advanced language for them if that isn't their native language. And if students are interested in learning a language, either the language itself or content taught in that language, we're also really explicit with what level they need to be able to have in order to have access to those classes. But yeah, the short answer is they can take classes in English anywhere in the world, and particularly in English-speaking countries.
There's some more questions follow up about housing. So specifically, if students were to study abroad in the spring, are they able to live on campus for fall?
Yes, they can. So same as what I said before, students are given information about instructions for signing up with housing, and we do communicate that to them so they have time to do that. And then we also work with the UMass Housing Office so they know who's going abroad, and so they have a little bit more direct connection to having that because they're a very particular group of students.
There's some other questions. Let's see. It looks like some folks are asking about how credits transfer for those courses taken during study abroad. If you have anything you want to chat about with that.
Yeah, so all study abroad classes automatically transfer back to UMass for credit. As part of the application process, one of the steps that your students will do will be to pre-approve any of the classes that they're taking to fulfill specific UMass degree requirements, which means they will be working with their academic advisors to say that this class that I'm taking abroad will transfer back to fulfill this specific credit in my major. But a really nice, easy way to remember that is just anything taken abroad will automatically transfer back for credit no matter what, no extra work required. They just do a pre-approval so it satisfies something specific within their UMass degree requirement. And that includes gen eds. We also have a process if a student wants to take a gen ed abroad to have that fulfill a UMass gen ed requirement.
There are a lot of questions coming into the chat, so we'll do our best to answer those. So the next question, some folks had a question about the session on February 24th. Did you have the time of that info session? And then additionally, do you know when applications are going to be opening for semester abroad? Like how far ahead can students apply? Can they learn about that at the info session?
Yeah. So our study abroad fair is very much a fair. So it will be Monday the 24th from 4 to 6 p.m. in the Student Union Ballroom. So most of that advertising will be up at the beginning of the semester when students come back to campus in a couple of weeks. So I say fair because it will be full of different programs at tables so students can go and learn a little bit more from representatives from those programs, what they have open to UMass students, what kinds of things they can offer, classes, locations, costs. And at certain tables, there will also be return students that can tell them a little bit more about the student experience. So it's very much go be in a big room, ask some questions, get a sense of what study abroad is about, and then just kind of come away with a little bit of enthusiasm and just an opportunity to take the catalog and speak to people in person rather than doing things only online all the time. And there was kind of a part 2 to that, Ashley, that I missed.
Some folks were wondering how far ahead do you have to apply for a semester abroad?
Right. Okay, so applications for summer, fall, and academic year are open now. Spring applications will usually open kind of mid-spring semester. So generally speaking, students are applying the semester before they choose to go abroad. So even something like summer, which is kind of immediately happening now, they'll want to be applying kind of on the earlier end of a spring semester in order to be able to go abroad for that. Because you've got fall and academic year that are happening a little later, they have more time throughout this spring semester if they wanted to be abroad in the fall. But generally speaking, you're planning about a semester before you want to go, but you could even start thinking like up to a year before you want to go, especially if they're considering a program that might be a little competitive, or they might need a little bit more advanced planning based on academics or other needs that are worth doing extra research.
Thank you so much. I think I want to be mindful of time, but there's a few more questions. One question that seems to be popping up, if you have time still, Emily, is folks are curious, what are the most popular locations to study abroad? And are there some that are more competitive than others to get into?
Yeah, absolutely. So the most popular destinations for UMass students are Barcelona in Spain and Florence in Italy. And Western Europe continues to just generally be more popular, but the Spain and Italy in particular are very big draws for our students. We actually don't have programs that are super competitive to get into in general. We have a couple that just don't have very many spots for our students, and so we're always upfront with those would be. So a couple of those, there's a program in the Netherlands with VU University that can be a little bit competitive. There's an exchange partner we have in Paris at the University of Paris Dauphine that only takes 3 students per term, and so that can fill up pretty quickly. There's even a program that we have in Cyprus that will sometimes have housing capacity issues, and so we let students know if it's filling quickly. But by and large, students usually aren't having to worry about capacity issues. Oh, since we did get some Japan questions, there are some limits to the amount of students that we can send for Japan, but we have a variety of partners, so most students who are wanting to go are able to go. They just might not get their first choice if they're planning a little bit later.
One question that folks are asking is if this will be available for folks to access later, and yes, it will. We are recording it and it will be up on our YouTube. So our Family U Chat YouTube, it'll be recorded up here so you can go back to this. Let's see. I think another question is regarding majors and academic interests. So like a lot of things are folks are asking if certain majors should go to certain countries, if there's like recommended fields of study that should go to different locations. Folks are just curious about that.
Yeah, so an easy way to do that is sometimes colleges and departments may have resources that your student can help narrow their options. So as an example, Eisenberg School of Management, they are a very friendly college to send students abroad, and as such, they've developed a really helpful resource to help students narrow their options because they have so many choices. Other areas like engineering might have very specific recommendations because of when students are choosing to go abroad. The easiest way for your student to find out is to go to their colleges and departments and just see if there's any resource-specific information about study abroad is just a place to start. And if there isn't, they can always come to us and we can help them with more specific research. So for instance, in our program search, you can filter by academics. And so we can help them say, if you wanted to go to a specific country and you're looking for specific classes, these are the programs that will be better fit based on the amount that's there and how that would work based on how far you are in your degree process.
A couple of chats have come in that have a common theme are, what are the typical options for housing abroad? Does UMass help folks find that housing? Those are just a lot of housing questions specifically abroad that are coming in.
Definitely. So housing will be slightly different based on the program, but the common things that always exist if students are going on what we call an exchange program, which means we are sending our students to their university and they're sending their students to UMass. Very often they'll be in a student residence type equivalent. And so they will have priority access to sign up for housing in those student residences. And just like at UMass, there'll often be different types and different prices, so they can have a bit of a decision on which one is a better fit for them based on how much it costs, amenities, and so on and so forth. So that's really common if students are going on exchange programs. If students are going on what we call partner programs. Those are those study abroad organizations, those companies. They will often have furnished apartments in and around the school. And so they'll also do a housing form and students can choose a little bit more kind of like a roommate matchup, that kind of thing. But they will also have photos on their websites for their programs so students can see a little bit better what are the different types of housing, different configurations. Because sometimes students will want a single room or they'll be able to do a double occupancy. How big are the apartments? Generally, where are they located? Things like that. Some programs do have homestays, although that's getting to be more rare, but the ones that do offer homestays, there'll be more information on the program website in terms of what are the expectations for being in a host family, what's included, because usually you'll get a little bit more support for meals, access to do things like laundry, where are they usually located, what are kind of the rules and customs, and what makes a good fit for a student if they choose a host family. So those are usually the three areas would be like student residences, furnished apartments, and homestays typically are the big ones you'll see based on the program.
Thank you. I've noticed another theme of questions around grading with students studying abroad. So folks were curious how grades transfer over, like is it pass fail or is it a grade? And then adding to that, do students usually take a full course load, like 14 credits? And I think the other question that kind of went with that is, ooh, they're coming in hot. I think the other component of that was, yeah, how is broad coursework even on their transcripts recorded? So what's the course load look like? Is it pass, fail, or graded? And kind of what does that look like on their transcript?
Yeah, so students are going abroad for a semester. We do require them to maintain full-time status just because that supports their enrollment at UMass and very often their entry requirements for that country. However, full-time enrollment doesn't necessarily mean load up on classes. Very often we encourage students to be closer on that minimum if they have the space because they're there than just classes. Very often there's sort of the other things that they wish to accomplish. So this helps them get a better balance for that, especially if they're adjusting to a different academic calendar. So usually they're aiming for 12 US credits or the equivalent, but that can go up based on their needs. Summer programs, you're usually doing like a 3 to 6 credit option, although if you do need to use financial aid for a summer program, 6 is your minimum to be able to do that. And then a winter session, you're usually doing 3 credits. And sometimes we might have some really substantial summer programs where you can do up to 9 credits too. That just depends on what the student is working with. When you're doing your classes abroad, all of them will come back and be on the UMass transcript. So we actually have in our office the Global Education Registrar who processes all of those transcripts. And so those will show up there on the transcript in terms of the course title and the letter grade. However, the grades are not factored into the UMass GPA. So they are recorded. So if the student had a really strong semester, you can see that they did well. If they had kind of an okay semester, it doesn't calculate into the GPA. And we do tell students if they have any post-grad plans for graduate school to just be prepared that their GPA can be recalculated for admissions, to be aware. But in the moment, if they're working really hard for that C, then it's not going to affect their UMass GPA upon return.
Thank you. Kind of with that question, are CHC Commonwealth Honors College courses able to be taken as well abroad? Is that a possibility?
It is absolutely a possibility. So just like working with academic advisors, students will also work with their Commonwealth Honors College advisors so they can learn a little bit more what would constitute an honors requirement. Is there an extra step that they can do to have that count towards honors? So again, they're just checking in with their advisors, getting that information, and very often they're completing that component once they come back, but absolutely possible.
Wonderful. I will say I used to work in the Honors College and a lot of my students went abroad. They loved their opportunity and it was very possible. A question that a lot of folks seem to have is, are meal plans generally available abroad, or do students usually need to cook on their own?
Generally not. You do see it more than you used to. But by and large, students aren't able to do a meal plan. That said, very often there are cafeterias and other student kind of those sorts of student places to eat that they can choose to, buy meals and have that on a student card. but they very often will have cooking facilities in their housing. And so they are able to go and buy groceries or even have communal spaces, you know, in their apartment or in their dorms with other students on the program, either US or international as well. But yeah, most of the time, not really a meal plan, but that's why you should check your costs, because that isn't always the case. So it's always good to read the fine print to know what's particular to your student.
I think another question that has come up is, do students ever have internships when they're abroad? Are there some programs that include an internship opportunity?
Yeah, I glazed over this, but yes, we do offer programs that specifically have internships as well as research placements. And so if that's something that a student is interested in, they can find that when they're filtering for programs in our program search. And depending on what their area of interest is in, a lot of the programs that we work with that offer internships will have different placement examples based on their discipline, like their major or if their particular area of interest. And it's actually a really involved screening process just to make sure that the internship placements are valuable and are worthwhile for students. Very often they are taking a course to support that. And so it's an internship for credit. They're never really getting a stipend for the majority of the time, but they are having a good academic experience that's supported by credit and having a class that goes along with kind of that transition and reflection and processing and learning in that environment.
There's a couple of short, quick questions that I can name off for you. One question that folks have is for the fair that's coming up on the 24th, are all schools within UMass going to be represented there, including Eisenberg, or is it not really even formatted by college?
We actually don't format it for college. A good example is if you looked at our catalog online and then had most of those folks in person instead of looking at them on a screen like in a big directory. So you'll see it sorted by study abroad program provider. So if any of you have taken a look at our website or know of other students and families that have studied abroad, we'll have providers like API, CIS Abroad, CEA Kappa, Global Education, and then even our own programs. So we offer a lot of exchange programs. So I know we had questions to where students can go for Japan. There'll be a table specifically advertising UMass Japan exchange programs. And so that's the way it's set up, more so as opposed to college and department. We have it more the programs that are available from our catalog. And then from there, we try to do a little bit of guidance in terms of, you know, students, they get pretty savvy. They're like, do you have anything for X major? As they kind of circulate through and you tell them, yes, here's some choices, or no, try these programs. So they have a pretty good sense as they're kind of coming through what kind of questions to ask.
Someone was wondering if China, if there's sites in China that will be represented that you serve.
Yeah, so now that that's a little bit easier than it used to be coming up after COVID, we do have a few different options for China. We work with a study abroad provider called CET. So if you're ever curious about hopping into our database, that'll be a name that you see coming up. So we do offer programs in Beijing, Shanghai, also Taiwan for something a little bit different for students wanting to study Chinese language. So absolutely, it's a choice for UMass students.
A question that someone has is how many students percentage-wise actually go for a whole year abroad? Is that even possible?
It's possible. Of our total numbers, it's a fairly small percentage. Most of our students will choose semester over academic year. I would say less than 10% of our overall enrollment for that. It's not a big number, but it's certainly possible. Another thing that is possible is students can choose to do one location for one semester and one location for another semester. That does involve some good planning with us, just because you need to make sure you're doing things in the right order for entry requirements and things like that. That's definitely something that's possible too.
Let's see. So is it too late to consider a summer program for this year? Some folks are wondering.
No, timing is absolutely perfect. And it's great because there's still a little bit left of the winter session. So you could even hop on the website and see what summer programs are out there, how soon those deadlines are happening. I would even say if students are serious about considering summer study abroad, definitely come and see us, or kind of get looking at the application deadlines and program choices by early February. I think if you waited too far into February, there might be either very few choices into March. It'll definitely get a lot harder. So now is the time if you're thinking about summer study abroad for this upcoming summer.
You. And that going along with that, can students also study abroad at any time in their academic journey? If someone said their daughter will be a senior next year, is it possible to study abroad your senior year?
Absolutely, yes. So a lot of this is just making sure that everybody is aware of what needs to happen. So yes, we do send students that are in their last term at UMass. We actually have specific instructions about how that works with graduation and getting their transcripts back and so on and so forth. But yes, I've actually sent some students abroad this fall where that was their last semester at UMass and they could stay as long as they wanted to once they were done with classes. And so, yeah, absolutely. Their big thing is just making sure that they've wrapped up all of their graduation requirements before they go and know what the study abroad things will play into that, just so that there aren't any surprises. But yes, absolutely.
I did have someone asking if there is a process if you wanted to do a program or live with your friends abroad.
Yeah, that's actually really common where friends will come in together, even friends from different universities, and see if they can make that work. And as long as the program is in our database, they can absolutely do that. And very often for housing, it's just like housing at UMass. They'll have a housing form and they can go ahead and request flatmates or apartment mates, and they'll do their best to honor those requests as well. But yeah, very common to see groups of friends going together on a study abroad program.
That's exciting. I did have some students who got to study abroad as well, and they said it was great having a buddy. We only have two more questions. One of them was regarding safety, specifically in a program in Cyprus, but just in general, do you want to talk about safety with traveling abroad?
Yeah, absolutely. So all of our locations are vetted for safety and security reasons. So we have somebody who's the director of health, global health, safety, and security here at UMass, and it is her job to make sure that our entire campus community is safe when traveling abroad, and that includes our undergraduate students. So we have selected programs that uphold these health and safety standards, and so it's things like making sure that they have support staff to take care of our students, medical facilities, different mental health and physical health sorts of things, awareness of safety and security concerns with embassies and so on and so forth. But we monitor everything going on around the world and scale that within specific things of risk. And whenever anything specific happens to students, we have well-used emergency communication plans. If something happens to a student and they need help, or if something happens in a particular area, we all work together to make sure that the student is supported and that UMass is aware of it and that information trickles back to families as appropriate. And really, there's a big network of just making sure that every type of situation is accounted for, communication channels are clear, and that if something happens in an emergency, that everybody is aware of who to call for help and how that process will work. But yes, it is something that's extremely important to us to make sure students and families are aware of that information, their expectations, the resources available to them. And there's a lot more of it on a program level as students learn a little bit more about where they're going, what's specific to their particular location, and details of who to call when's appropriate for an emergency number, when is something that's urgent and important but can wait until the next day, how you can access medical facilities, what happens if you're a victim of a crime, petty theft can unfortunately be common. And so what are the support mechanisms so students are prepared in an emergency and feel supported if something happens while they're abroad?
Thank you, Emily. I wanted to end on this last question because I think it might be a great way to wrap up our session today. But the question is, what can our students hope to gain from the experience of studying abroad? What's the biggest takeaway for students studying abroad and the benefit?
I'm going to take advantage of having sort of a parent and family audience. I think that the learning and growth that students experience is something completely different than what they would have if they were to only remain on campus. There's a lot of just growing up and learning how to navigate different situations and having a lot of transferable skills to figure out anything once you move beyond your time here at college. You're learning how you thrive in a new environment, how you set up things to make yourself successful in that environment. You're trying new things, you're meeting new people, and you're figuring out a little bit more about yourself and how you rely in different environments. And then, of course, you're getting exposure to different types of education. So different classes, different education styles, but then also if you're taking advantage of internships and research, just different ways of doing things. And for me, it's really gratifying just to see how students can grow and change and become more confident because they've figured out the highs and the challenges that will come with that too. It's all a really big learning experience that teaches them that they are capable, and even if things are hard, they can learn from them and grow and get more of those skills to do well beyond UMass.
Thank you so much, Emily. I think that's a beautiful place to stop. And I know we have answered all the questions in the chat. So thank you again for all the attendees participating with us and joining us today. And thank you so much, Emily, for giving us such helpful information. And as you put on your slideshow, this is how folks can get in contact with you if they have more questions.
Yes, absolutely. So lots of different choices. I've got a bunch of different hyperlinks here, but we've got our website. We have different sections within that can be really helpful. I also have a link to our program catalog if folks wanted to go in and kind of see what that looks like a little bit. I've plugged our Global Education Advising Center. And then of course, I've got our traditional general email and general phone line too, if folks, want to contact specifically for questions.
Thank you so much. And as a reminder, again, this was recorded and we will also post it on our YouTube channel. So that way you all can go back and use this as a resource if you would like to do that. So thank you all again for joining us today, and have a great afternoon. For those of you up in the north, it's a chilly day, so stay warm. And yeah, thank you again, everyone. Have a great afternoon.